meet all these faces after the holiday break. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're here because of you, and we're glad to see you here tonight. I'm Michelle Miner. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the producer of the History Lecture Series. I see a bunch of new faces. Welcome. Just a couple of notes. On the back table, it's actually a small desk this time, there is a sign up. If you are not on our mailing list, we would love to have you on that. We'll give you information about each lecture that's coming up. This does happen on the first Monday, barring any holidays, of every month during the academic year. And we hope to bring you some entertaining information and topics. Today we have somebody special in the auditorium. It is my pleasure to say that when Dr. Warner retired, we were gifted a new chancellor. Dr. Tina Tinney is with us tonight. She comes to us with an extensive background, part of it being here at Nunez before Hurricane Katrina. She was actually a department chair in our science department. She comes with a great background, moving up the ranks, working at Southeastern, one of our other colleges in the LCTCS system. But we all, as employees of Nunez, when she gave her inaugural address to us, felt like she was coming home. And we're glad to see that she's got a progressive attitude, and we feel like she's going to be a great supporter of what we're doing here, especially at the History Lecture Series. I'd like to introduce her and have her say just a couple words. Dr. Tina Tinney.
Thank you, Michelle, for those very, very kind words. I am delighted to be with you here this evening, and thank you for making time to come to share in the History Lecture Series. I am coming home, and this, to me, is one of the best things that this college does for our community. So I encourage you to join us every Monday during the academic year, the first Monday of the month, so that we can engage in looking at all the aspects of wonderful historical tributes and to share those together. I also want to tell you that as you enter through tonight, I want to thank Michelle for the effort in providing some beverages and snacks for you to enjoy the presentation. And I do invite you to bring those in as you watch the presentation. I simply ask that as you return out of the auditorium that any trash is just discarded as you exit. So on that note, I know that you all are here for tonight's lecture. I'm eager to listen myself as February marks Black History Month, and it provides an opportunity to pay tribute to all of the African American men and women who have made such significant contributions, not only to America, but to our entire world. So I'm happy to share with you this evening for tonight's History Lecture Series, and look forward to seeing you at future series. Thank you.
Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker to you tonight. Mr. Waymand Brothers came to me a long time ago and said, I would love to do a lecture about World War II and the Tuskegee Airmen. And I'm excited to have this topic here tonight. I know a lot of people are interested in it. Just a little bit about Mr. Brothers. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, long way from home. We're glad to have you there. Graduated with organizational management and studied social work as well. He's been a counselor for troubled youth for over 30 years, and he's done some remarkable work in that field. He's also a member of the Red Cross for over 20 years and is a trainer for disaster assistant, and he's a shelter volunteer as well. So thank you for your service, and that means. He continues to do research in history because that is his real passion. And he's done that research on topics like the Underground Railroad and colored soldiers. We're going to be a recipient of some of that research tonight. He's one of the most sought out speakers on these topics in our area and around the world. And he continues to give to his community and his church family. A lot of people that volunteer, they keep us going. And we're here because of volunteers. So that means a lot to us, Mr. Brothers. Thank you for that. I won't keep you any longer. I'll bring up Mr. Waymand T. Brothers.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me, and it's very much of an honor to be here. I like to do something first that we always do at the World War II Museum. That's one of the places I volunteer. Do we have any World War II veterans? And I think we do have the World War II veteran in the room.
Yes, we do.
Is he still here?
Mr.
Sir,
Ritter.
if you could just raise your hand. Yes, sir. Do we have any other veterans that served our country in any capacity that's in the room? Yes, sir, thank you. One of the things that I like to do is I like to honor those people that actually gave me my start, because I've been very fortunate, I've been very blessed. I have a lot of mentors, and I like to mention them whenever I go out and speak or do anything like that. I got involved with history probably back in the early 90s, and one of the things that happened is I had a very good friend named Vince DeForest, who was actually the assistant to the Secretary of the National Park Service, and he came to my small town that I lived in and gave me a presentation about the Underground Railroad, and the next thing you know, I was traveling around the country, being involved in advisory councils and all kinds of things, and working with the Stromberg Museum in New York, with people from around the country, and not only that, we reinterred some African burial bones that were found in the burial ground in New York back to Africa. So I've been very fortunate with doing those kind of things, and this kind of history has now become my new passion. And the World War II Museum got me on my start talking about the World War II. I had been doing things about Civil War, doing living history about the Civil War and the role that blacks played in that. And I want to talk about the African American experience in World War II, because that's very important, because not only, let me get this thing here, with technology, please bear with me, I'm not very technical. I do it, but that ain't my strong point. I'm really a talker, that's why I was into counseling. I don't have any kind of mechanical skills or anything like that, and make my wife laugh, because when we have to work on our house, I fell off a ladder once, and that's when we needed to get contractors. I'm going to talk about the double victory, and the reason why we talk about the Tuskegee Airmen is because they were one of the most prevalent contributors to World War II effort, and you heard a lot of stories with the movies that have come out about the Red Tails and things like that. And I've been very fortunate that I've gotten an opportunity to meet with numerous Tuskegee Airmen. And I do the living history. If you saw out on the table, there were a lot of books out there, and there were some very fascinating stories. But I want to start with this. African Americans actually served in every conflict in the United States. It was not just in World War II. It goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, and every kind of major conflict, African Americans played a part. But unfortunately, because of discrimination, racism, and some other things, and segregation, they weren't given the credit that they would do, that they're capable of performing in any arena like any other human being. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about, but we're going to highlight it with the Tuskegee Airmen. The other thing that I'm going to talk about tonight, and I know next month, is Women's History Month. So I'm going to tell you about the Tuskegee Airmen that were actually women who were actually pilots who trained other Tuskegee Airmen. And that's something that we don't hear a lot about also. But the Tuskegee Airmen, anyone who participated with the Tuskegee experiment, and that's what they called it at the time, was considered a Tuskegee Airman. And that was both white, black, because remember, because of segregation, they did not have many officers that were pilots or anything like that, so they had to bring in whites that actually oversaw those units until officers could move up the ranks. So the Tuskegee experiment, as they called it, was the reason why that they got involved with getting an Air Corps. And the Tuskegee Airmen are very interesting because I like to walk too, so if you see me drift away, keep telling me to come back if you can't hear me, because I'm a walker and a talker. But the Tuskegee Airmen experiment actually kind of gave you the cream of the crop, because most of the people that participated in the Tuskegee Airmen programs were actually very highly educated college guys, had professional careers that wanted to become pilots. Now I'm going to talk a little bit off the track because I'm going to mention some people that you haven't heard of, but played a significant role in how the Tuskegee Airmen and how they got involved with World War II. So as you see here, that every African-American served in every branch of service throughout the war. They served in the Navy, they served in the Marines, they served in the tank battalions. They served amphibious. They did everything that anyone else did during World War II, but you don't hear much about that. They were in the Navy, they served on destroyer escorts. Actually, one of the first admirals in the Navy actually was an African American who served on a destroyer escort. And that destroyer was called PC 1286. And it was actually a sub-chaser up and down the Atlantic. So we had blacks serving in all aspects of the war. They actually also served as the infantry. They served as pilots. They served as nurses, and they served as tankers. They did all of those kind of things like everyone else did, and they were just like anybody else. They wanted to do things that was interesting at that time. They wanted to be pilots, but because of discrimination and other things, they said they didn't have the capabilities of doing it. So I have to take you back to show you this one woman that I'm going to talk a little bit about, Betsy Coleman. And the reason why I talk about Betsy Coleman is because she was actually a daughter of former slaves, and she had the desire that she wanted to fly. Now, she couldn't be trained to fly here in the United States, so she had to go over to France, where she could actually get a pilot's license. And she did. And she dreamed, like any other young person with flying going on and everything, to become a pilot. And she was kind of the precursor to what other blacks wanted to do, to become pilots just like everybody else in this country. She actually was born in 1892, a sharecropper. She was inspired by many different things. She knew that discrimination wouldn't allow her to become a pilot. But she learned French and taught herself French so that when she went over to France, that she would be able to communicate. And she worked a different job to save up the money to do it so that she could get a pilot's license, and she did. Betsy Coleman, these are some of the honors that happened as a result of her and her getting a pilot's license. Now, this was the precursor to what was going to happen later on, going with the Tuskegee Airmen. This woman here was another pilot. Her name is Janet Briggs, and she was a Tuskegee Airmen pilot. She had gotten her license. She trained over 2,000 pilots to fly. 200 of them became Tuskegee Airmen. And we don't hear much about her, but she was the first in a lot of things. Not only was she a pilot, but she also was a nurse, a mechanic, and she was a forerunner in running for Congress and other kind of things. So the Tuskegee Airmen kind of said something about people wanting to be a participant in the war and to do their share and volunteering. And they showed the courage to step away from doing the normal things and saying it couldn't be done and saying, I will do it. And that was the difference with racial discrimination, like I said, that no one would want to train her. She became very active. She also was an active in a school, one of the few schools that was actually given money to teach blacks how to fly. And it was called Coffee School. And that school was a result of her going out and getting her aeronautics license on her own through other avenues. She actually was a member of numerous groups. She did a lot of things in terms of challenging. Tonight, what I'm going to do also is talk a little bit about the myths about the Tuskegee Airmen and tell you what they actually did. Like I said, I've been very fortunate. I met quite a few of them. A gentleman named Charles McGee, who was a Tuskegee Airman. But first, I'm going to do what I always do, is I'm going to have my grandson, Avery Tooman. He's going to come up to you, and he's going to give you a little bit of how the training programs began. Come on, Avery.
Okay. When I went to an air show, I met Pilot McGee It was fun because not often you get to see somebody around like that. And it was probably the last pilot I probably will get to meet. I'm gonna read chapter 4 of the Tuskegee Freedom Flyers of World War II Airmen. The CPTP began in many U.S. colleges in 1939. Its purpose was to train civilians to become pilots. In the late 1930s, the U.S. Army only had about 4,000 pilots. Many more would be needed if the United States entered the war. But at the time, the Army wasn't large enough to train all of these pilots. The CPTP was the solution to this problem. More than 1,000 colleges and nearly 1,500 flight schools participated in the program. The training was divided into 72 hours of ground school classes and 35 to 50 hours of actual flight instruction. At the end of the program's first year, more than 9,000 military pilots had been trained. Thanks to Senator Truman, the CPTP became available to students at Tuskegee Institute beginning in December 1939. Tuskegee Institute was a highly respected black college in Tuskegee, Alabama. Tuskegee Institute, now known as Tuskegee University, is located in eastern Alabama. It is the only college in the United States that is also a National Historic Site. Tuskegee Institute was one of the first 6 black colleges to offer the CPTP. About half of the 2,000 black pilots who graduated from the program trained at Tuskegee Institute. The CPTP ended in 1946. This partial victory was a huge step for the African Americans. They saw the CPTP as a way for them to eventually be allowed into the Army Air Corps. They hoped it would only be a matter of time before the U.S. military allowed black pilots to fly. All CPTP students were required to take a written examination in March 1940. The exam was given to Tuskegee Institute CPTP students. Every student passed. Their passing rate was the best in the South.
Now, when you see him at home, he doesn't wash any dishes, he doesn't rinse your ears or anything like that, but he does a good job being a public speaker. Thank you, Amy. So, the CPT, and to say it was the civilian pilots training program that was started. And that's how we started to train pilots so that we could get involved. And there were several things that were pressured FDR and the government to provide money so that African Americans could be trained. And they gave that out to several institutions to where they had to provide training to get pilots ready to participate in the Tuskegee experiment. The other thing is that one of the instructors at the Tuskegee program was a gentleman called Charles Alfred Anderson. Now, Charles Alfred Anderson, he was the gentleman who was responsible for taking Eleanor Roosevelt on a flight the first time that a black flew the First Lady on a flight. Now, Charles Alfred Anderson was a gentleman who actually taught himself how to fly. He did that by buying a plane and getting a book, and he taught himself how to fly. And that was the gentleman who actually went on to get his pilot's license. And when Eleanor Roosevelt came to Tuskegee, they asked if someone could take her out for a plane trip because they wanted to show that they were capable of flying planes. Well, she was the one that was selected to take Eleanor Roosevelt up for a plane ride on her first time flying with the Tuskegee Airmen and giving them the kind of reputation that they were capable airmen like any other person was. And that became a myth, because what happened was it did happen, but it didn't happen chronologically when they said that it happened. It happened actually before. And because when she was supposedly had visited, she really wasn't down, but they printed a news article about it, highlighting the program. Now you gotta remember, during World War II, racial discrimination was very prominent. People were not allowed to intermingle and things like that. And every effort that blacks did to try to get involved in the war, they were discouraged. They were giving the second-hand equipment. They weren't given the best planes. They wanted them really to fail at that. The Army wanted them to fail. Up until that point, they said that most of the jobs that African Americans did during the war were only going to be as supportive. They could be stewards, they could be work on the ships as cooks, they could do all of those kind of things. They could actually load the weapons and unload the weapons. They could do mechanical kind of things in terms of engineering, but they did not want them to participate in war. And there was a reason for that. I'm going to take you to this gentleman. And the reason why I mentioned him too, his name is Eugene Bullard. Now, has anyone ever heard of Eugene Bullard? No? Okay. Well, guess what Eugene Bullard did? I'm ready to walk away again. You got to keep pulling me back. Eugene Bullard fought in World War I. And guess what he did in World War I in France? He was a pilot. And not only did he fight in World War I as a pilot, he fought in World War II. Now, something I found out very interesting when I was researching him, we have kind of a kindred spirit. I come out of a place called Peekskill, New York, and I found out that Eugene Bullard was actually going to an event that was being held by Paul Robeson in this small town that I came from. And on his way going to there, he never made it to the concert that Paul Robeson was going to hold because a race riot actually broke out. Well, let me just clarify that. It didn't begin as a race riot. It began because Paul Robeson was associated with communism and things like that. But then it deteriorated to a race riot. But he was on his way going there. But let me just show you what he did. He was born in 1895 in Columbus, Georgia. He joined the French Army at the beginning of World War I. He saved up his own money. He fought with the Moroccan Division in the 170th Infantry. He received my French isn't good, and I guess what, I had 2 years of French, and I still can't speak any. Yeah, thank you. Well, and he was very decorated, but we never heard about him, and he also was a pilot. And so this was another example that they said that the Tuskegee experiment was something they had to test out, when in reality, blacks were able to do anything that anyone else was capable of doing, and he did. Eugene Bullard not only fought in World War I, but he also fought in World War II. Now, remember what I said about the fact that they didn't want to give African Americans the saying that they could fight in wars and do things like that nature. Well, there was another unit that was involved in World War I too, called the 369th, the Fighting Hall, okay? And they fought with the French, and they were very decorative, and the French gave them all kinds of medals and awards. So they were actually combat troops. But then they said they had to do a Tuskegee experiment. This gentleman here is the gentleman that I'm posed with out on the poster that you see out on the table. He's a Tuskegee Airman too. And it was very interesting because when I did my first living history, somebody took a photograph and put me under this gentleman. One of the other things that I do, I go to the Tuskegee Airmen conventions every year now, just so that I can meet any living Tuskegee men that are still around. And when I needed the information about him, I wrote down. And then they told me what he did during the war. And Lieutenant Charles Bailey attended Tuskegee Institute. He enlisted in the Air Force Air Corps, and he learned to fly. He was a second lieutenant upon graduation. He fought with the 99th Fighter Squadron. Now, the Tuskegee Airmen actually began as a fighter squadron, but they didn't have much success during the war because everyone wanted to kind of discourage blacks being able to contribute and to fight during the war. So the fighter squadron was actually placed in positions where they couldn't do anything successful. They said they were a failure. They weren't able to shoot down a lot of fighter planes, things like that. And it really wasn't very decorative at the time. But they never were sent on any mission, so naturally what happened? You can't be successful if you don't really go out and do anything. The African Americans allowed into flight school, the experiment, segregated fighter squadron. Now, remember this, that because of segregation, before the Tuskegee Airmen, we didn't have meteorologists. And the reason why we didn't have meteorologists is because they wouldn't allow people to study to be meteorologists. But because of segregation, they had to train people how to do meteorologists. And everybody that participated with the Tuskegee Airmen actually participated in every aspect of running a unit. That means you needed pilots, you needed nurses, you needed clerks. And so it was a segregated unit. And the only way that they could do that is they had to train them. Well, guess what happened? They started training them into becoming meteorologists. They started to have to train them how to become dentists. They needed every component that you needed to run a unit. So they had to do that so that segregation, because guess what? Blacks couldn't go to the same hospital as whites during the war. They couldn't use the same blood because they said if you were black, you couldn't use white blood, and whites couldn't use black blood. And they actually segregated the units in that way also. So the Tuskegee Airmen experiment, there was a lot of myths that developed out of that. Finally, the fighter squadron, after Benjamin O. Davis, who became one of the first black officers to oversee the unit, because up until then, the only pilots that they had and officers that they had at the time were white. Knowles, who was head of the Tuskegee Airmen, was a white officer who was in charge of them. And one of the things they said about him was that he didn't have a prejudiced bone in his body. He was a fair man, he was white, but he treated the men equally. He actually did some things on the Tuskegee Airmen base that was kind of unheard of. He made all of the officers' quarters, things like that, he made them integrated. That they could go to the officers' clubs, they could do all of those kind of things. Because before that, because of segregation, black officers could not go to white officers' clubs. They were separated. And if you didn't have a black officers' club, then you couldn't go to have a beer or to relax or do things like that. So he desegregated that in Tuskegee Institute. But then later on, Lieutenant Colonel McGee, Jr., whose father was actually the first African-American general in the Army. Okay, he was a graduate of West Point, and so was his son. Colonel mixing up my people now. Actually, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. was the first 20th century African-American to graduate from West Point. He endured the 4 years of silence that when you're black in West Point, the other cadets couldn't talk with you unless it was doing classes or anything like that. So for 4 years, he had to rely on being on his own and kind of going through the treatment of silence. He wasn't allowed to eat in the same areas. They were not to have discussions with him or anything like that. He was one of the first 5 successful pilots. Later on, there were more classes that graduated and more people were able to become pilots. The 99th actually was kind of disbanded and roved into the 332nd. At this time, Benjamin O. Davis became in charge of the Tuskegee Airmen. He came back to Washington, D.C., and he fought with them to allow them to become escorts, rather than being a fighter group, knowing that they weren't going to get any responsibilities or any major missions to go on. He said they take responsibility for escorting the bombers that were going into enemy territory. Okay? One of the first things that they found out is the average life expectancy for a B-17 pilot before the Tuskegee Airmen got involved with them was only 8 missions. So that means that you had 8 chances to survive doing bomb runs when your missions of completion was over 25. So they were losing a lot of crews and pilots at a tremendous rate. Whenever they flew over, the likelihood of them being shot down. And the reason being, there's a lot of myths about what happened. The myth was that the white pilots would actually abandon the bombers and chase the fighters. And that was a decoy. That's the way that they pulled them away from protecting the B-17 bombers. Well, when Colonel Benjamin O. Davis became in charge, he told all of the Tuskegee Airmen that whenever they were on a bomb run, if they left those bombers unprotected, they would be court-martialed. So their job became that the only thing they did was to escort them on bomb runs. Now, there were some myths about that, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Let me just tell you what the Tuskegee Airmen experience did. An estimated 16,000 to 19,000 served at the Tuskegee airfield. Now, out of that 16,000 to 19,000 were people documented as being Tuskegee Airmen. Now, didn't mean you were a pilot. It meant that you were part of that experiment. So that means you were ground, you were a doctor, if you were a nurse, if you were actually a mechanic, because you had to keep the planes flying. That was what they called the Tuskegee Airmen. Anyone that participated in that. And like I said, you didn't hear much about the female pilots that actually trained them because they volunteered. They wanted to become WASP, but the WASP would not allow the black women pilots to become WASP and to fly the planes that were made over and taxiing over to Europe and things like that. So they went to these experiments, this experience, and that's when they were able to train men how to fly planes. The other thing was there was 925 pilots, and they were trained in 2 different ways. They were trained as 2-engine pilots or single-engine pilots. Single-engine pilots were the guys who were fighter pilots. The dual-engine pilots were those that flew B-25s. And there were a lot of different reasons why the bomber pilots were trained with the 332nd and with the Tuskegee experiment. Some of the pilots could not do some of the training that you had to do if you were in a single-engine plane. And that means you had to do a kind of overturn. And there was one bomber pilot who talked about each time he would try to do those slip-over turns, he would pass out. So he said he couldn't be a fighter pilot. So what he did become was actually a bomber pilot. And he learned how to fly the B-25. And he actually, that saved his career in terms of becoming a pilot. Now, the bomber pilots were never deployed over to Europe. The only people that were deployed over to Europe was actually the fighting groups. And I'm going to tell you how many of them flew over there, how many of them participated in those kind of European deal. 925 of them were pilots. 5 of them were Haitian. Now, think about this. There was actually a gentleman, and we don't hear a lot about him also, but his name is John Robinson. Now, John Robinson, there's a book about him out on the table. He's another story who was a Tuskegee Airman because he came back and he was a pilot who actually flew with Ethiopia. He had gotten his pilot's license, and he went over there and he fought with the Ethiopians in 1939 when they were attacked by the Italians. And he was one of the pilots that flew during that period of time, and then came back to the United States and served with the Tuskegee Airmen. But there were 11 instructor pilots, 51 liaison pilot graduates. Now, the liaisons were actually guys who were trained that could fly, but they would be assistants to other units like the infantry and things like that. And they would go out and kind of do reconnaissance and things of that nature. And that's what their roles were. There were 44 classes held throughout the experiment. The first graduating class in March 7th of 1942 had 5 pilots, including Benjamin O. Davis Jr. There were only 355 of those pilots were sent over to Europe to actually fight. And they were actually flying with the 99th Fighter Squadron, which was a pursuit squadron. And then you had the escorts, which were the bomb escort that escorted the bombers whenever they went on bombing runs. Then there were the 44, those single-engine fighter pilots were deployed. Then you had 84 Tuskegee Airmen were killed overseas during World War II. Well, hold it, wait a minute. I gotta go to my phone. I left one of my books home, but I thank God for technology. The Tuskegee, here you go, walking again. The Tuskegee Airmen actually was so prolific in terms of escorting bombers on runs that there became a myth that the Tuskegee Airmen never lost a bomber. That is not true. But their amount of losses was so minute to where in 1,500 bombing escort runs, they only lost 27 planes. Now that's very significant, thinking what was the average length of a B-17 pilot before these escorts started happening? 8. And then afterwards, it went up. They decided that they were having such a success with the bombing raids that they raised them from 25 missions to 30. Because think about it, when you lost, oh, my book is here, thank you. This is the Bible. Every morning, I get an email from a gentleman in California, and he tells me the history of the Tuskegee Airmen every morning. That's what I wake up to. Okay, now I have my DOT stuff, and like I said, there was 995 were deployed. Only 84 died during their missions. Tuskegee Airmen flew over 1,500 missions. They only lost 27 bombers. Now, I'll give you the breakdowns of what they are. During World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen fighter pilots flew 1,200 missions, 6,381 combat sorties with the 12th Air Force Unit. 312 missions, 9,152 combat sorties with the 15th. So they actually flew escorting the 15th and the 12th Air Corps on missions, bombing runs, scraping, reconnaissance, and all those kind of things. And that's where we came up with those numbers. The total amount of kills that they had of other planes was 112. Another 150 were destroyed on the ground. Another 148 were destroyed in other airways by the Tuskegee Airmen. They actually had destroyed over 950 railroad cars, trucks, and other motor vehicles. They did destroy one ship that kept it out of operation for a while. They destroyed over 40 boats and barges and destroyed them. They received the Presidential Citation for 3 missions. The Legion of Merit, the Legion of Merit was given to Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. He was given the Silver Star. He was actually Captain Woodrow W. Rocket was given a Soldier's Medal. They earned over 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 61 Purple Hearts, 25 Bronze Stars. The Tuskegee Airmen experiment, when it first began, it actually was given to several different locations. There was probably about 20 locations where actually blacks could be trained to fly, and then they went on to Morton Air Force Base in Alabama, and that's where they got their advanced training and things like that. And Tuskegee Institute was started in 1851. Today, they do have the National Park Service has taken over that Morton Air Force Base out in Tuskegee, Alabama, where they preserve it. There's a major project going on now with the Tuskegee Airmen organization to where they're going to build a $75 million STEM program on the parking lot above where Morton Field is today. If you get a chance to go out there and to see the exhibits and the planes and things out there, it's really a treat. But just to end, here we go. I love to walk and talk. But just to tell you, this whole thing just speaks to how all of this misinformation. I have a book out there that talks about the two gentlemen, Herb Halbert and John Learn Jr. John Learn Jr. was a Tuskegee Airman, and he escorted numerous B-17s, B-25 on bombing runs. Hal Herbert actually wanted to thank the Tuskegee Airmen for escorting him and getting him back safely off of bombing runs. When he went there to thank them after the war was over, he ran into John Learn. They found out that they lived in Ohio when they were young, and they were in the 3rd grade together. And because of segregation, they weren't allowed to actually become friends and to get along with one another. And outside, I have a photograph of them standing together in their class when they were in the 3rd grade together. And they traveled around the country after the release of the Red Tail, talking how segregation was wrong, and all of that time of their lives that actually they met in war and they could have been good friends long before that. John Learn has passed away. I've been very fortunate working at the World War II Museum that a woman came in one day and we had Fighting for the Right to Fight up on the board. And she saw John Learn. And she shared the story with me. She said, I used to work for him. And she said, I didn't even know that he was a Tuskegee Airman. Unfortunately, our World War II veterans come back from the war. And their stories are being lost because they didn't believe that they've done anything because so many people have been lost during the war. But they were one of the greatest generations. Where's my pointer? Oh, here we go. Let me get to where I want to get to now. These are some of the photographs of Tuskegee Airmen. I actually took a picture like this with me to one of the conventions that I go to, and there were people in that room that actually gave me the names of most of the people that were in the photographs that I had. And here you see me doing some of my living history, me at the air show. And right there, you see that young man. There is actually four generations, and because his mom isn't there, but that's me, Colonel Charles McGee, one of the most decorated Tuskegee Airmen. He flew over 409 missions, both in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He was also very instrumental because not only was he a pilot, he was a mechanic also. And after the war was over, he knew how to repair planes, and he also knew how to fly them. And then he flew jet planes and did reconnaissance for the Korean War and Vietnam War. And so So you see us standing together there, and it's been that kind of experience that it also brings it back home when you get to meet them. And that's me standing next to our plane that we have in the World War II Museum before it was hoisted up, where it's located in the U.S. Freedom Pavilion. Now, I have my own little history to share with you. I'm the last human that sat in that plane before it was hoisted above where it's at, and I turned it over to a mannequin. Thank you. If you have any questions or anything like that, I'd be happy to answer.
Anybody have any questions? No? No questions? Okay.
Did I cover it really good? I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing it. This is one of my first that I did. Like I said, I've lectured before to the Weather Bureau, and I talked about how weather played a significant role in World War II. That actually, if it wasn't for forecasting the weather, there were a lot of battles that wouldn't have happened. We actually had a German weather base secretly up in Canada that told the weather covering the entire Atlantic coast. It also was involved in the Battle of the Bulge. And the reason why it was involved in the Battle of the Bulge is because they told Hitler that if he wanted to do an offensive during the war, that there would be kind of overcast and planes wouldn't be able to fly. But they made a wrong prediction that there was a break in the weather and we were able to resupply the troops surrounded at Bastogne. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ritter, you have questions?
Sure.
How many black pilots we have today in the Air Force?
How many black flyers today?
Well, it's significant today. Actually, there's women and men, and actually, there's a story, I don't know the exact number of how many, but I do know that the women pilots today, African American and white, that they literally have gotten to where they flew the, what's it called? I can't think of the name of the plane. That's what happens when you got all this information you get. But there's a plane that we just decommissioned that actually flew, I think it's the 72 or something like that. But it's a plane that was so fast it was never shot down by a rocket. And there was an African American female that flew one of those also. So African American women and men pilots today, just like anyone else, they got their commercial licenses. Actually, we did have some firsts where there were 2 African American women that were actually flying a commercial plane, in charge of flying a commercial plane with people buying their passenger on it. Anything else? Yes?
Do you know what kind of engines the planes were equipped with?
The most successful was actually the Merlin. The Merlin Rolls-Royce engine was the one that they used in the P-51. Before that, now let me just say this. Before we got the P-51 that gave us supremacy of the sky, they were using what they called the P-40 Warhawk, which was wasn't as fast as the fighter planes, but it was very accurate in terms of shooting down planes. Now, the Tuskegee Airmen and all of the fighter pilots, they flew P-40s, P-47s, and then the P-51. Before that, they had the P-38, which was actually a two-engine plane, twin-engine plane that they used during the war. That was pretty comparable to being successful whenever they had to fight fighter duty and things like that. Yeah.
Which were more maneuverable? Probably the fighters for sure, right?
Well, the P-40 was accurate. It wasn't as fast. And then also we had the plane that they used during the Pearl Harbor when we actually devastated the Imperial Japanese Navy. And that plane was the Avenger. I got to go through my planes in World War II Museum right now. We have the Avenger, the Corsair, and the one that George W. Bush flew. That was the Avenger. The Dauntless, wasn't it? The Dauntless, yeah. The Dauntless was the one that actually, thank you, who's that? Thank you, sir. Yeah, the Dauntless was the one that actually we we took out the Japanese during the Battle of,
Pearl Harbor?
no, not Pearl Harbor. Midway. That's what we took out, and that was the most successful plane that we had back then, the Dauntless. But the Merlin, let me just tell you about the Merlin engine. When they first had the engine that they put in the P-51, the plane wasn't that successful. Not until they went over and they got the Rolls-Royce engine, and that's the same engine that they used in the Spitfire. R.J. Mitchell, who designed the Spitfire, used the Merlin engine, and that engine gave us the power that we needed, and that's when we got supremacy of the sky. If you go to the World War II Museum, we have a Messerschmitt that's hanging in Campaigns of Courage. There's a German pilot's story that's in there, and they talk about how many missions he flew, and he flew both the Messerschmitt, and he got an opportunity to fly the P-51. And he said that's when we got supremacy of the sky. When he flew it, he saw why. Yeah, because that plane could outperform him. The other thing that they did with the P-51 is they actually put auxiliary tanks on it so that they could do long distance flying. And the only time they dropped their surplus tanks was when they engaged with other fighters. But they had those tanks on so they could fly with the bombers on their runs and to come back.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again, Mr. Brothers. We appreciate that. We hope you found it enjoying. Just a couple memos, please pick up your trash if you came in with food and bring it out. And if you want to sign up on that mailing list, it's down at the front table.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you for coming, and we hope you'll be here next month when Dr. Waymand will actually be our speaker. He is going to pay tribute to Mr.
So just sort of, we sat down, and I sat next to a Tuskegee Airmen.
Listen, that's what happened to me.